Hey guys, Levelcap here, and today we're taking a look at the top 10 most expensive video games ever made. I'm talking big bucks, fat stacks, and primo cheddar. This list is made with information that is publicly available, so hidden or non-publicized amounts cannot be factored in. I'm sure some Blizzard games would have made the list, but again, that information is not known by the general public. And before we get into things, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next top 10 list. Now, starting off with the bottom of the list at number 10, we've got Crysis 3, which cost $66 million to develop. And despite the original Crysis being a household name and a smash hit, the sequel failed to impress due to its linear design. Crysis 3 was an attempt to bring the franchise back to its sandbox roots. It featured more open levels and missions like the original game while still offering linear sections where story elements and set pieces could happen. Graphically, it was also a return to form for the franchise. Crytek had made several concessions when developing Crysis 2 so that it would run properly on consoles. And despite looking great, it wasn't the same kind of leap we saw with the first game. Crysis 3 pushed the visuals to the next level, but that just wasn't enough to draw players in. Plenty of games looked amazing in 2013. Graphics alone no longer impressed. Crysis 3 bombed hard. While the first two games had sold more than 3 million units each since launch, Crysis 3 only sold around 250,000 units in its first month. Lifetime sales of the game are probably under 1 million in total, which is a shame because it actually had a lot of really good things going for it. Number 9 on the list is 2014's Watch Dogs. This game cost Ubisoft $68 million to make, and it launched in 2014 to a widely mixed reaction. It was a high-profile example of misleading advertising in gaming. The E3 footage and teaser trailers of Watch Dogs presented a city teeming with NPCs and a real sense of atmosphere. But what launched was a visually unimpressive, sterile, and overall weak title that borrowed heavily from Ubisoft's Climb a Tower to discover stuff formula. Despite the controversy though, the advertising seems to have done its work as Watch Dogs quickly became one of Ubisoft's most successful titles. It broke their sales record for day one sales and would go on to ship over 10 million units. The graphics and interactivity might have disappointed, but the game's sheer scale is still impressive and is clearly where a lot of the cost went. At number 9 on the list, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is the final game in Crystal Dynamics' reboot of the classic franchise. Its production budget is estimated to be between $75 and $100 million. The original reboot of the franchise in 2013 generated nearly universal critical acclaim and eventually sold over 11 million units. Combined with its marketing budget, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the publisher's most expensive title ever. It wasn't nearly the same kind of smash hit 2013's Tomb Raider was, but it still managed to sell over 4 million copies by year's end. As for the future of the franchise, it's unclear if a direct sequel is in active development. Number 7 on the list is kind of a weird one that probably a lot of you never even heard of. Defiance is an MMO shooter made as a tie-in game for a show of the same name on the Sci-Fi Channel. It cost the developers $80 million to produce and has actually outlived the show itself. Sci-Fi canceled Defiance in 2015 due to its high production cost after only 3 seasons. The game, however, continued to get updates. In 2018, an improved version of the game called Defiance 2050 was launched as a standalone title with improved graphics. At number 6, we have the unfortunate final chapter of Hideo Kojima's work with the Metal Gear franchise. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is a sprawling monster of a game. It cost $80 million to make and is considered to be an unfinished project. While details are unclear, it seems like Kojima and many studio executives were planning to leave at the end of 2015 when their contract with the parent company Konami expired. As the situation worsened, Kojima's name and studio were removed from the marketing material for the game. By the time it launched, it was clear Konami were taking control of the franchise. This came to a head in December when Konami blocked Kojima from attending the 2015 Game Awards. The large amount of recycled content featured in the last third of Metal Gear Solid 5 is thought to be the result of development shutting down early because of Konami's treatment. And despite the dark cloud looming over the game, it still sold 3 million copies in its first 5 days and has gone on to sell well over 6 million copies. Unfortunately for the franchise, Konami quickly drove it into the ground with Metal Gear Survive, a 2018 survival shooter that was both a critical and commercial failure. Number 5 on the list is a somewhat familiar title for fans of this channel. DICE spent $100 million on Battlefield 4's development. While its launch and roughly first year of release was a roller coaster of technical issues, it's since gone on to gain a reputation as the best Battlefield title for many players. Its sheer quantity of maps and weapons dwarfs most other games in the franchise, or just most other games in general. To date, it's sold well over 7 million copies, making it one of the most successful Battlefield titles ever. Next up at number 4 is 2012's Max Payne 3. Costing $105 million, this was a follow-up to the acclaimed Max Payne 2. And unlike the first two games, Rockstar developed this entry in the franchise. The original developer, Remedy, had moved on to develop Alan Wake, but they consulted with Rockstar throughout Max Payne 3's development. The end product is a flashy, well-crafted, and action-packed adventure told through the eyes of an alcoholic man hell-bent on self-destruction. The gritty tone and ramped-up action struck a chord with players and critics. Despite being well received though, the game's sales didn't quite meet expectations. A year after launch, it had only sold 4 million units. Disappointing sales, coupled with the extreme budget and long development cycle, effectively put the franchise on ice. The third spot on this list belongs to Grand Theft Auto V. While the combined budget of the game's marketing and advertising is well over $265 million, it only cost $137 million to make. There's not much to say about GTA 5 other than it's a massively successful title that dominates sales charts not just in gaming, but for all media. It made $800 million on day one of release. 2 days later, it was sitting at $1 billion. It was the fastest selling product in entertainment history. It's also one of the most sprawling and detailed open world games ever made. And while the game's single player campaign and overall world is an impressive tour of Rockstar's incredible talent and resources, GTA Online is the real showstopper. It continued to get regular updates for the past 7 years and has pushed GTA 5 to be the biggest revenue maker in all of entertainment. To date, it's pulled in $6 billion and 122 million units sold. Now, Rockstar may have gone big with GTA 5's production, but they're not even close to the top spot on this list. Star Wars: The Old Republic's $200 million budget makes it the second most expensive game ever made. BioWare swung for the fences with this MMORPG set in the Star Wars universe. Like most MMOs, it hasn't enjoyed the same kind of success World of Warcraft has, but it still pulled in over $1 billion in revenue since its original launch in 2011. In 2012, The Old Republic made it into the Guinness World Record as the largest entertainment voiceover project ever by featuring over 200,000 lines of recorded dialogue. Since launch, it's received 7 major expansions that have added an immense amount of content to pretty much every area of the game. Now, the top spot on this list bucks every trend and precedent in game development, and anyone who's been following my channel for a while probably knows what's coming up. The number 1 most expensive game of all time is Star Citizen. Its current production budget is over $270 million. The crazy part is, nearly all of that money is from crowdsourced fundraising. Now, Star Citizen's numerous delays have turned it into something of a meme in gamer culture. Many people allege the game will never become a finished project. It was originally scheduled to launch in 2014, but the immense success of the game's crowdfunding led to a massive expansion of the game's scope and expanded development timeline. The end goal is to realistically simulate essentially an entire universe that is populated by players, NPCs, and whole planets teeming with life. The developers launched the first module of the game in 2013. It was a basic ship hangar that let you look at and customize the ships that you purchased. From there, new modules have slowly been added that expanded the game's features and content. Today, it's pretty playable, but still clearly an unfinished game. You can explore several planets, including one that's completely covered in a never-ending city. The game's single-player campaign, Squadron 42, is hopefully going into beta later this year and features a star-studded cast with Gary Oldman, Mark Hamill, Gillian Anderson, Andy Serkis, and more, all lending their voice and appearances to the game. The ambition behind Star Citizen is frankly unmatched by any other game out there. The end product might not live up to that ambition, but that hasn't stopped players from donating to the game's development. And while established AAA developers are regularly spending tens of millions of dollars on their games, it's unlikely we'll ever see a game more expensive than Star Citizen that isn't funded by players. Now that wraps it up for this top 10 list. Let me know in the comments down below if this is how you expected it to turn out. One thing that I feel like I should mention is that World of Warcraft almost certainly would be on this list if we knew the actual development cost. Information came to light in 2008 that the mere upkeep of the game since launch had cost Blizzard over $200 million alone. So if you factor that into development costs or whatnot, it's clearly a massively expensive endeavor. So it would be interesting to know what the total cost of World of Warcraft was, but I think that's probably a figure that's going to be very difficult to calculate, and we just may never know. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.